Yeah, so what are we talking about?
All right, cool. So, James, let's talk about how you motivate yourself when you experience a major setback, especially when you're reaching your goals and it feels impossible. Have you ever felt that way before?
Feeling impossible, an impossible setback? Yeah. Yeah. I think we've all experienced that at some level. Probably the more notable one was a bad car accident that I got in.
So, backing up a step, for anyone watching who might not know you, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the journey in the fitness industry before your accident?
So before the car accident.
Before.
Um, well, before that, I was working as a high-tech recruiter. Actually, I was in between jobs at the time that it happened, and reached that point where it was kind of dead broke. It was like down to my last buck. And I had a job interview in the Bay Area at the time uh, for another high tech recruiting company. It was just, a point in my life where not a lot of things were going right. But as far as fitness, you were asking about that. Yeah, I mean, I was working out all the time. I was in great shape. That was probably the one thing that I had going for me at the time.
This was more than just a regular car crash. Can you walk us through what happened on the day of your accident? Like, what do you remember about the scene and the moments leading up to it?
So my interview was in the middle of the day in the Bay Area. I lived a few hours away, so once I got the job, I was going to move. I took a shortcut to get over to I-5. I was living in California at the time. So I was running just a little bit late, so maybe driving a little bit faster than I should have been. Um, and as I was driving along, I saw something up in the road in front of me, and as I got closer, I realized that it was a bird. It was a big pheasant right in the middle of the road. So I remember honking my horn a couple times. It didn't move. Got a little closer, honked again, it didn't move. And right as I got up on it, it took flight and it came right towards my windshield. So my knee-jerk reaction was to swerve, and when I did, I realized there was a giant truck coming the opposite way. So I tried swerving back, but the car just fishtailed around and crashed right into him head on.
Wow. How about were the injuries?
Yeah, well, I was ejected 70 feet from the vehicle. I don't really remember the impact itself. I just remember the moment before, kind of like that saying goodbye moment, because I honestly thought that I was a goner. Um, so when I came to, I really had no idea what the injuries were like. I couldn't feel anything. Body was pretty numb. I do remember them putting me on these boards and stretching my legs out to stabilize my legs because I had both legs were broken. Actually, when they found me on the scene, my legs were folded up underneath me, my feet up here by my head. So it shattered both of my legs. When I got to the hospital, they air flighted me or life flighted me in a helicopter to the hospital. And once they did the assessment, the trauma surgeon, they had told my family that, pretty much it was like a bag of bones. So, you know, arms, legs. Fortunately, the only thing I didn't break was my neck.
What was the moment you realized your fitness journey was about to change due to the accident? Like, what went through your mind?
It wasn't even right away. It was a few weeks into the stay in the hospital. I remember asking the doctor what that recovery was going to look like. Like, when could I go back to the gym? When could I do things like run? Because at that point, I couldn't even walk. And I just got really vague answers from the doctor. I don't know if he didn't want to give me false hope or if he just really didn't know. But I just had that kind of realization like, wow, I don't even know if a full recovery is even possible because I wasn't getting that answers from the doctors.
How long were you in the hospital for?
Uh, seemed like creeping up on 6 weeks.
So you were in the hospital for a little over a month. What was that most humbling part of your stay in the hospital?
So I had casts on both arms. I was pretty much, flat in bed the whole time. And so, having to use a bedpan and having someone have to wipe your ass for you is pretty humbling. Yeah.
I imagine how it had to feel pretty down and even depressed, maybe. What was it that helped you turn it around? Was there some sort of pivotal moment or change in your thought process?
Yeah. Um, I remember one night I couldn't sleep. Most nights I couldn't. It was just my body was so uncomfortable. So I remember being awake all night and looking out the window, watching the sun start to rise. And it was, I guess, fitting for the moment. That there was a scene that matched this epiphany that I had. It wasn't really an epiphany, but I was feeling really sorry for myself in that moment. Really just like indulging in this feeling of like, poor me. And, I couldn't really see light at the end of the tunnel at that point of how I was going to get through this. So sitting there staring out the window, and all of a sudden I just got this flashback of something that I had read a couple months before. And it was weird because I felt like in a way I was almost prepped for this. Like I had this prep, which was I was on this mission reading all these different books, like started with Tony Robbins and then, Napoleon Hill, and it was just like arming myself with all this information. And all of a sudden this Napoleon Hill quote came like flashing back to me, which I'll probably butcher this, but it went something like this. Through every adversity is the seed of an equal or greater opportunity. And so I thought to myself, I'm like, all right, so the seed of every adversity equals equal or greater opportunity. I'm like, all right, well, this situation right now sucks. So if there is some sort of opportunity on the other side of that that's equal to this or greater than this, then that's a massive opportunity. And so that was like this shift where instead of seeing the accident as something that happened to me, that I was somehow a victim, that this was an opportunity. This was that opportunity to somehow, grow or become stronger, or somehow this was, going to be part of, this journey. Because at that point, I felt kind of lost in my life. That's probably why I was reading all those books in the first place. And so I don't know. In that moment, I latched onto it, and I'm like, you know what? This is going to be a comeback story. And that's what I told myself, that, how do you want the story to end? Do you want it to be this story where James gets in a car accident, he was in really great shape, he used to work out all the time, and now he can't do it anymore, and now he's fat and depressed for the rest of his life? Or is this a moment where James embraces this accident and everything that's happened to him, harnesses that, and uses that to propel himself into a better future? And so in that moment, I just decided that's what I was going to do. And it was kind of like flipping a switch. It wasn't like a gradual transition. It was, I feel depressed and I feel sorry for myself in an instant, almost like a lightning bolt. I felt the opposite.
How did you cope with the frustrations or the limitations during your recovery? Were there specific strategies or mindsets that helped you?
Well, I mean, look, there were all sorts of frustrations, different stages. I mean, in the beginning, I couldn't even sit up in the hospital bed. I would sit up and I would just, feel so lightheaded, start to feel dizzy and then pass out. It's because my red blood cell count was really, really low. I'd lost a ton of blood in the accident, and they'd given me a lot of transfusions, and I got to a point where I didn't want any more transfusions. My family had authorized that, but there was something about it that, I mean, I know it saved my life, but there was something that kind of creeps me out, to be honest with you, about having someone else's blood in me. So I didn't want any more transfusions. And, the way that your body produces new red blood cells is through bone marrow. And some of the biggest bones in our body are our femurs. And so here, both mine were crushed, and at that point had metal rods in them. So was kind of impairing my body's ability to create new red blood cells. So I felt like shit. So even just sitting up was this massive challenge. So, to go from that to having physical therapists come in to try to get me to sit on the edge of a bed, to eventually, to get onto a walker, or, all those stages were all monumental in themselves. My best strategy, it wasn't even anything, I think, deliberate. It's not like I had something in my mind that was helping me push through, other than the fact that I had already made up my mind. I had made up my mind, where I wanted to go, and everything in between those 2 points of where I was and where I wanted to go was just work, was just steps to take. And so at that point, that's what I did. I just put my head down and went to work, and I didn't think about it. I didn't indulge in it. And I think that was probably actually the biggest key, is when you're trying to get somewhere and you don't know what that path is going to look like, how to get there. You haven't got it figured out. And if you did try to sit down and figure it out, you'd probably be frustrated and want to quit. So I didn't even indulge in that. I didn't think about the next day or the day after that, or when I was going to get back into, my old shape. I just focus on that day. What am I going to do today? And I know that sounds cliche, but that was it. It was just like, I couldn't think past that, because if I did, it would depress me.
After your 6-week stay in the hospital, how long did it take before you can return to the gym? And what was that experience like? Were you able to resume your previous level of activity immediately?
The gym. So after I got out of the hospital, they wanted to put me in a convalescent hospital, but I refused. I just felt like that would kill my morale. And so ended up convincing the doctor to let me go home, and they had home health care. So I'd have a physical therapist that would come, a nurse would come, because at that point I still couldn't take care of myself. And so once I was done with kind of like the home physical therapy, then I started going to a physical therapist's office. And that's probably where the actual, more of the work started. At that point, once I realized if I can get to the physical therapist, then I can get to the gym. And so I talked someone into giving me a ride, because that was kind of like a big to-do, getting me anywhere. It's not like I could hop up in a seat. I literally had a friend who had a van, and they opened up the door and I would sit on the floor because I couldn't climb up into a seat. So they took me to the gym that way, and I went in there shuffling in on my walker, and I was like, bound and determined to do something. So it was like literally as soon as I could go into the gym, I went there. Probably when I shouldn't have been there.
So were there moments when you felt scared or unsure about your future? How did you confront and overcome those feelings?
Felt that way every day. Every single day. I think, look, I'm no Tony Robbins. I don't have all the answers for someone else, but for me, it was just not indulging in the way that I felt. Like I couldn't afford to let myself go down that mental or emotional path of all the what ifs, just because, I couldn't see the light at the end of the tunnel. And so, to sit there and, tell yourself, okay, well, you're going down an impossible road with no light at the end of the tunnel. How motivating is that? So I just had to kind of shut it out, be very disciplined with myself. The thoughts would come into my head, not just every day, but all through the day, every day. And so it was just that. It was just like shutting it down, saying, okay, nope, not going to go there. And, trying to reel it back in and get myself back into this other mental state of, I've got a goal that I'm going to chase down. And I'm not going to think about this other stuff at all.
How did you balance listening to your body's needs with the desire to push through and regain your fitness?
Well, this is a tough one, because I always feel like I've got to be careful what I say, because I don't want someone to interpret it as some sort of medical advice of how to get through an injury, because the reality is I probably did a lot of things that any good doctor would tell me I shouldn't be doing. I definitely pushed the limit, but I feel like that that was what I had to do. There were listening to my body. I mean, my body hurt like hell, every part of it. So, I don't know what signal my body would have sent me that would say, stop, this is worse than what you're already doing. I think I just had to use good judgment, and figure out what that fine line is between really, really pushing myself out of my comfort zone and doing things that hurt and felt uncomfortable, but doing it with a bit of common sense and, kind of holding back a little bit. But, the thing that occurred to me was that I'm going to physical therapy and they're doing crazy stuff. Like I had what they call heterotopic ossification in my legs. And all that means is that the blood pooled in the muscle tissue and then calcified and turned the muscle hard and inflexible. So my legs were straight as a board. I couldn't bend them at all, not even a little bit. And so they used to sit me up on this high table and sit there and literally just like physically wrench on my legs trying to break all that loose. And it was excruciating. So I would think about that. I'm like, well, this is therapy. This is like in my best interest. This is good for me. So, going to the gym and pushing myself, yeah, I'm like, all right, risk versus reward. Like, yeah, this is worth it.
Can you share a moment during your recovery where you felt particularly discouraged, and how did you overcome that?
Man, again, there were so many times that I felt discouraged, literally every day and for different reasons. How I overcame it. Yeah, again, I don't think there's a magic answer. And it's not like I think I'm just like somehow naturally have more grit than somebody else. I do think it takes that. But I think where grit comes from is feeling like you have no other choice. I used the example once of people who used to cross this country from the East Coast to the West Coast on wagon. And you think about like, what kind of grit would that take? All the things, the elements, winters, all the things that could kill you. So you had to be tough. And I think about like, well, how were people so much tougher? I think it's because they really just had no choice. It's like if you're on the middle of the trail, you can't throw yourself down on the ground and have a pity party and feel sorry for yourself because you'll die. So if you want to survive, you just keep going, right? You just stay on the trail and you keep going. And I think for me, that's how I felt. I felt like I did have a choice. Everyone has a choice. I felt like the alternative was something I wasn't willing to accept. I wasn't willing to accept that I was just like maimed for the rest of my life and that I was never gonna be able to go to the gym and work out the way that I like to and build my body back. I just wasn't willing to accept that this was gonna be some sort of, sad story. I was dead set on the fact that I was gonna recover, and those were my options. It was like, it was this or it was this. And this I wasn't willing to accept. Therefore, suck it up and do what you have to do.
How long was your total recovery, and how long did it take you to build yourself back up?
First stage, I would say, was walking. That was big goal number one, to be able to walk again. So I was on a walker with arm braces because I had casts on both arms. So I was on that probably for 2 months at least. And I pushed myself trying to, just improve. And so eventually then I was able to transition to a cane. And so I had a cane that I walked with way too long. I think it wasn't just like a physical crutch. It became a bit of an emotional crutch as well. The reason I say that is having the cane, it was obvious that something had happened to me. When people would see me, they were like, all right, this guy's walking with a weird limp and he's got a cane, something happened. Therefore, it made me feel better about being scrawny. You gotta remember, I was skin and bones. I came out of the hospital like 130 something pounds. So when people would see the cane, they're like, oh, something happened. And that just made it easier for me to digest the fact that I was in this state that I was. And so it became a bit of a mental crutch for me. it was hard to shake that. Like even when physically I was ready to move past it, it was hard for me mentally and emotionally, because as soon as I got rid of the cane, then I was just a scrawny guy.
How has your training philosophy or routine evolved as a result of overcoming your accident?
Well, I've always preached, you know, using disciplined form, control, that you don't always have to just lift crazy heavy weight. That if you use a little bit more control, good range of motion, good rep speed, that you could make a little bit lighter weight feel really heavy and still get the level of intensity I wanted in my workouts to get the results that I wanted. A lot of that was born out of that. It was actually born out of necessity. They say, necessity is the mother of all invention. And so for me, it was with my style of training, because at the time, everyone I knew trained ridiculously heavy. And that was tough for me at first, because I just knew I couldn't train that way. I mean, I could, but then I'd be miserable. I remember doing squats and I would lay on the ground in between my sets in like sheer agony. And I would keep doing it set after set after set. And I'm sure people around me were looking like, what's wrong with this guy? And just one day I just realized, I'm like, I've got to smarten up. Like if I want to be able to keep doing this for a long time, I've got to change, my thinking. And so that's where it evolved over time. And, then pretty soon I realized that's actually a really effective way to train for anybody. And if you want to have some longevity in this, what I still call a sport, but, weight training, if you want to do it for a really long time, the way that I ended up training actually works really well, super effective. You can build just as much muscle, and you can probably avoid a lot of the injuries that you experience when your only approach is just going crazy heavy like I used to.
What advice would you give to someone who's facing a similar setback and feels like giving up on their fitness goals?
So I don't really believe that I'm in a position to give someone advice. I've always been that way, even with my friends. I was never the guy who would say, hey, let me give you my advice. If someone asked me what I would do in their situation, I could tell you that. So I can only tell you that for me, it had to start with a spark. Having some sort of inspiration isn't the ultimate thing that I think is going to carry you to the finish line. But for me, it was important in the very beginning. I had to have that moment where I flipped that switch and I got inspired, where I got excited about this goal and I was able to picture it really clearly and make that decision, that commitment to achieve it. So I think, those two go hand in hand, right? It's the inspiration, it's this vision of this idea, but making this absolute commitment. Because once you make that commitment, all those other things, all those questions, like how am I going to do this? What's this path going to look like? When's it going to happen? When am I going to be able to do this? Who knows? But all those things, will start to fall in place if you make that commitment and you just start doing the work. Have a plan, but it's impossible to create a plan for all the unknowns. But, it's like, all right, well, what kind of work do I need to do to try to take myself in that direction? And you just got to put your head down and you got to do the work. And you have to slough off all those negative feelings and the doubts and all those things that are going to creep up on you, because you have to believe in yourself. You have to have that confidence that you can do it. You may not know how you're going to do it. You don't know when you're going to do it, but you know that you can do it. And even if you don't have a good frame of reference, like other successes in your life, try to think of small ones. Maybe you don't have one for something so big, such a big goal or such a big stretch, but what are those moments that you've had in your life that you can use as a frame of reference where you were here and you wanted to get to here and you did it. And you felt like that was a win, that was accomplishment. And so I found myself falling back on things like that to be able to accomplish this. And then the crazy thing is that ultimately became a frame of reference for me for future challenges, right? So my frame of references were these little challenges. Now I had this big challenge that I was able to overcome and to work past, to ultimately find success. And that made it so much easier for me to take on bigger and bigger challenges. And so my probably best takeaway through all this would be is if in that moment you can see it as that. You can see it as that opportunity to create that frame of reference for yourself, that success. And that really is kind of the whole gift in it. It's like a story my mom used to tell me when I was a kid. I've said this a lot, but she told me a story of a kid who asked his mom if he could go out in the barn and play. They lived on a farm. Mom said, sure, no problem. So after him being out there all day, she goes, where is this kid? So she goes to the barn, opens up the door, and she finds him like up to his neck in this giant hole in horse shit. And he's shoveling. And she says, what are you doing? He's like, well, Mom, he didn't say shit. He's a kid. All this horse manure, there's bound to be a pony in here somewhere. Moral of the story, no matter how big a pile of shit it is, if you dig enough, you can find some sort of opportunity. And that was my attitude going into this, is like, all right, this really sucks, but let me really focus here and think like, what good can I pull from this? Because I can either pull bad from it, and it can be that sad story, or I can really look for the good, the opportunity in this, and make this a success story.